In Zoomland, it is Coach Sandra, compassionate queen of straight talk, and I am so happy to get back and do an interview again. Well, a conversation with Sandra, because over the Christmas and then over the January, I got behind. But today I am thrilled to have Karen Wood talking about genealogy. To me, she's a family roots enthusiast, and her passion for family history is contagious. I would say contagious. Hello, Karen. Welcome to Conversations with Sandra.
Good morning.
How are you doing? Where are you located? We are in Canada, but you're in.
We are in Canada. I live in Ancaster, Ontario, which is part of Hamilton City. And it's not too far from the American border. And we've moved around a lot, but we've been here the longest, I guess it's since 81.
81. 82, I got into the financial business. So that's 40 years.
Yeah.
41 for you and being in Hamilton. And It's interesting because both of us have gallivanted around the world. We were both growing up on a farm in the country. And I'm just going to mention this, that it's interesting how country people can feel inferior to the street smart city kids, if you will. And I don't think it was ever just you and I. I think it's almost like not a stigma, but you just feel like, you're not as fancy as everyone else. Although you had a mother and I had a mother, and it happened to be the same mother who was also a hairdresser and a follower of the Queen. And that influenced us, even though we had a few decades of knowing our own value, even though we grew up on the farm. What was that little journey like for you, Karen? Because I shouldn't even call it a little journey. That was a big journey for each of us. And I suspect it has been for many farm kids. What was that journey like for you to know that we had a lot of smarts?
Well, it's interesting because when we did finally get television, Mom used it as a teaching tool. It wasn't just for entertainment. When Loretta, I remember Loretta Young, when she would come in, make her entrance through the door, and she'd swirl around and make an entrance into the room. Mother would always comment on, see how she's doing that. See how the Queen sits, how her feet are placed. All of these little tidbits, and they've always stuck with me. It's interesting. And even now, when I'm listening to children's choirs or highbrow music, I'm not listening to the music or the language. I'm listening to the quality of the sound. And I'm listening for, I go to those things. And those are things that Mother would have gone to, and later on, as when you mentioned country people feeling inferior, I think we probably had a bigger dose of that because Mother was always afraid that we might get, you don't let a child look at themselves in the mirror because they might become vain. Now it's a growth thing for the babies to see another baby in the mirror and react. And there was so many, I think she was afraid we would get a big head. And that was sort of counterproductive.
I think so too.
When I left the farm, that was a biggie. And it was probably where genealogy came in, because Aunt Lena told me about us being United Empire Loyalists. And so that gave me, I thought, oh, all right, we have all been agriculture farmers, and that's why I'm on the farm, and I can deal with that.
Yes, it's interesting because we come from really strong stock. And maybe it's that agricultural background, the United Empire loyalist having to decide Do we want to be American, or do we want to stand with the British crown, and so on? Both sides of that fight way back when, everybody was strong. We had to endure, and we had to rise up. But our current generation and environment over the last 50, 60 years, as we've been growing up, has changed and changed and changed in so many ways. We have the luxury, and I would call it the luxury and the obstacle of being able to look at ourselves emotionally. I mean, those people had no time for this luxury that we have to grow in our personal development. If we look at Maslow's hierarchy, you were worried about surviving and then stepping to the next stage and so on. This self-enlightenment that we have the luxury of today was not possible. And I think so many of us, and we're still in that. I mean, even our children in their 50s, at the beginning, while they're 50, and their children, I see all of them having that struggle of almost too much time for personal development and not being able to just accept what is reality today. What is reality? Deal with it. So there's that toughness that we were raised in, which has been wonderful, but it's really hard to give that toughness to our children and our grandchildren with the time that's available for personal luxury. It's a conundrum. So you going into genealogy, to me, has been quite fascinating, because it's the introduction, being able to understand where their decisions came from, understand their circumstances. And that's why history teaches us, but we don't study much history. But you're really into studying history of our family in particular, yes. But I'm just going to suggest to our listeners that this is for all the families. This is our story. I call it our story because you can't get rid of me. I'm your only sister. But it's really your journey and quest to know family. So tell me, why is it important to you to understand the family roots?
Why is it important? I'm just curious and interested. And our paternal grandmother that lived in the house with us, she was always talking about family. She loved to visit family. And so she would be talking about people. And so I have a list of names in my head. And when I do my research, I will see them, but I'm not quite sure how they're related. And it makes me more curious. And Dad, now he had a great memory, and he could recite the family trees of many people in the area.
Wow.
And he knew, and his mother always had she was a record keeper. I always thought she was very nosy when I was a kid.
Yes. Oh, there she is again.
But when I started checking and going on Ancestry and these records, the census and the birth, marriage, deaths, her records were accurate.
Wow.
And so when people ask me where I get my information, I say the family Bible, because somebody had to write it in the family Bible, and she had this little spiral notebook, and it was there. And so Dad would tell stories. The couple that came from England, finally, when they finished having children, the total was 13.
The total was 13. Big families, especially in agriculture, wasn't it? Big families meant there were people to work the farm and help with all the labor. So and in fact, it was because of the big families that, I'm just going to throw this in because this is really neat. It was because of all the labor that was required for the government and Britain to have people to work the land and open the country. That was where they started paying baby support, because they wanted to support families and encourage more babies. That's where it started. Did you know that?
I thought it was after the war. I'm not sure.
It could be,
that-
but whenever it was that they instituted
Yeah.
different kinds of support, whether they gave them land, to get started on or whatever, all of that was to make sure there were enough babies to grow up and work all this land, because it was all labor at that time. So big families were the thing, and not just because they were having fun. It was out of necessity. Go ahead, Karen.
Well, anyway, the child that is our great grandfather, which is John, it was John. He had 14 children, and these were the dad knew who everybody married. Now he didn't know all their kids, but he did know through John's branch most of the kids, and they were all rather close, and they visited. And so I became familiar with those names. And it's interesting when you start researching and find. And I did go and visit another branch of the family in Sterling, which wasn't too far away, and learned some other information. And she told me that the original couple that came, they had arrived in Kingston, and they stayed there, and they worked as gardeners to earn some money so they could get a wagon and team to head out towards Madoc area, which was further north. And she had a baby on the flatbed on the way to Madoc.
Oh my goodness. The flatbed would be the wagon.
The wagon, yes.
Oh my goodness.
So I don't think she got much rest after.
Strong
you
women,
talk about people
strong
surviving
women.
and being strong. So those are just some of the things that they dealt with. And it was dealt without thinking. Oh, I'm going to have a baby, and I've got supper to get. So
well, I
we'll
was
get
the
on with
baby
it.
of the family, and I know that Mom was always, that was always what hung over my head. You came on Christmas Day. I had already cooked the meal, and not one of them brought one of my hot meal to me to the hospital. That hung over my head forever, as long as Mother was alive. Nobody brought dinner that she had cooked to the hospital, because she prepared it all, went to the hospital, and didn't even get a dinner. And that was me.
That was you. Well, I was born on Mother's Day, so we ruined a couple of holidays for her. I don't think she minded, though.
Well, since we're into that, we know that we had 2 older brothers, and the real other one was that we had a baby sister who was the first baby Jacqueline. And you always were aware of it. The boys, they were older than us, but they never paid any attention. But you curious family roots woman,
yeah,
always knew about it. And I think that's why I always knew about it, because you kept it alive with the curiosity again about.
Well, Mom would talk to her girls about the baby more than she would talk to the boys about it. And that's sort of natural, I think.
So. But you know what's not natural? Dad would be delivering calves in the barn, and he would kick us out. You girls can't see this, but you boys get in here and help get this calf out of the cow. Like, they were young too. It was a society thing. It was where we grew up. And it has had a huge impact of our strength and a huge impact of our struggle to overcome. So let me just see where we were at. You were just always aware. I am going to I know that you had a real calling for both our grandmothers. You used to say Grandma Reed, and I used to say Grandma Wickens. Hattie B. We're never going to be like that, but here we are. You're like Grandma Reed, and I'm like Grandma Wickens, the nosy one that's always speaking up, and you're the introspective one that's always thinking. It's really interesting how we attached ourselves again to two strong women. And just to go on with that, when we sat with Pauline that day, she said, boy, you guys, you have a whole bunch of strong women. Doesn't leave men very much space. So here we are, two strong women left. We're the only ones left in the family too. So when people hear me say, well, you know, we crossed the veil, we don't get any choice, I often laugh and say, my sister and I look at each other and say, this isn't looking good, not looking good. Which one's hanging around the longest? And I hope with that we're also bringing to Zoomland, to our listeners, that, yeah, we don't get a choice. We have to, our choice is either die young or live, but we want to live. I want to invite people to keep living. It doesn't matter what our age is. Be curious, keep going. And that's certainly what you've done. You've gone into writing classes now so that you can write about your family stories, right? Tell me about
Yes. I've taken a lot of courses and workshops over the years. I guess it all started when I was young and listening to these stories. And the couple that came from England, he came from Kent and she came from Sussex. And so I looked at the map and I thought, wow. And having read different stories, I knew that back in that day, 20 miles was about the extent of travel that people would go in their area. They didn't, people moved around a lot, but on a regular basis, 20 miles.
And that would be about 30 kilometers, I think, for anybody that's into kilometers versus miles.
And I looked at the map and I saw that I was able, at some point, I've gotten letters that I wrote when I was first married to England, and I found out where the wife was born. Her name was Marianne, and she was her records, baptismal records, were in Rye, and that's in Sussex. It's right near the border of Kent. So I measured out, and 10 miles was to Tenterden, and so I thought, well, that's a good place. Maybe he came from Tenterden. So the more, as the years passed, I got into more online information, and I found them in Biddenden, which is another 10 miles forward, but found a birth certificate for a William in Tenterden. So then you start to think about where they traveled and how they got there. How did, she was in Rye. And now I think that gradually the story starts to take shape. After we went to England one year, and I went to one of the search areas for the county. I think it was Leeds Castle. And there was a lady there, and she had like a whole wall of Wiccans in the family tree. And I was telling her about our branch, and she said, I haven't heard of any Wiccans in Kent, which is interesting. She said, always in Sussex, Rutherford, I believe it is. So I went back and looked at the map, and Rutherford is just north of Rye. So then I think, well, if she wasn't aware of anybody being in Kent, maybe they, started to wander off and travel. Maybe there wasn't, like, if you look back in Google on weather reports and different things, you can trace back. And just before William came to Canada, there had been 10 years of drought and bad weather, poor crops, and they were agricultural laborers. So they
I'm just going to jump in right there, so hold on to your story. But what I'm seeing here as well is how historical novels would be written, or historical storytelling. And you're having to pull out an awful lot of assumptions and fill in a lot of blanks. So it's really hard to be totally factual. but the work that you put into understanding it all is phenomenal. And that means that when you go into your writing classes, you are deep into research, and then you have to create the story and match it up with who we are. It's totally fascinating. I just hope that we're sparking an interest in those listeners who want to get into the genealogy, and the ones like me who are fascinated and want to support you in it. Because quite often you'll send me things and you just read this through and see what you think. And I'll have little ideas and memories that I didn't realize they were there until you woke them up. And you'll say, oh, okay. And so it's very much a family working together, even if there's one that's just got to do it. You're just driven to it because it's your passion. I can see it every time. You love it. And I love that you love it. So if that makes sense to people, be there to support those who love it and help along with it. But I just want to tell you, I couldn't have a better sister. And I couldn't have anybody that's more passionate about where we came from and how that has filled in this luxury of self-development to allow us to forgive. The gratitude of what we learned. Sure, we had a dysfunctional family. I don't know of any family that's not dysfunctional, really, in our terminology of today. But I can guarantee that studying the family and understanding where they were and what they went through and how they did the best that they could with what they knew, where they were and what they had, allows our hearts to open up to gratitude and get over ourselves and find our way forward. We're the adults. Now we have to choose what we're going and explore those childhood things that are holding us down and change. We have to take charge. And that's the gift that you have been opening up, not only for me, but for yourself as well. To not be angry about the past. Stop it. Understand what they went through and how amazing they were, and how would we have changed it or handled it. So I really just want to put that out to everybody to come to your own peace and your own gratitude by bloody well taking the time to understand and get curious, period.
So I've as I said, I had been to several workshops and taken different classes at college, and but nothing has ever come of it. But I would make notes and I would collect information and stories. And a couple of years ago, I joined a family history writing group. And so this is what I've been talking about is you do your research, and then the research includes timelines of world and regional and personal, like what was happening in the world, how people reacted to things.
And the weather fascinated me, that you would go and look at the weather. Wow.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the social aspects, what was socially acceptable, what did they wear, how did they travel, and then you use your creative juices to put a story together from what you know of the people and how you think they would react in different situations. And that's called creative nonfiction, because you're basing your assumptions on fact. So when you write a book, you have to put a note to the reader, dear reader, this is what I know, and this is what I've researched, and this is how I think they would have reacted. And so then you write your story.
Wow. And
people have to accept it. It's your creative nonfiction.
That's beautiful.
And so I started